Okay, picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning, grab your phone, and stare at a headline so completely shocking, you have to read it 3, maybe 4 times before your brain even accepts it as real. And no, this isn't a movie pitch, and it's definitely not a history lesson from a century ago. We're talking about a real, immediate, and literally terrifying crisis. Britain has invaded France. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack this completely unthinkable scenario. It's a situation that turns history, modern politics, and, well, human emotion into an absolute perfect storm. It's wild to even think about, I know, but we are going to look at exactly what would happen if two of Europe's most connected neighbors, nations bound by treaties, trade, and centuries of shared modern life, suddenly turn from allies into active enemies. The ripple effects? They are absolutely staggering.
So just imagine the absolute silence for that one single heartbeat after the news breaks, and then the sheer explosion of noise that comes right after. Phones ringing off the hook, emergency alarms blaring across cities, news channels abruptly cutting into their normal programming. Social media would just instantly fill with pure, unadulterated disbelief. Millions of people across Europe, and honestly the entire world, would be asking the exact same impossible questions, like, how did this happen in the 21st century? And more importantly, what happens now? Because once you start pulling the thread on this scenario, the consequences spread so far and so fast, reaching way, way beyond any traditional battlefield. We're talking about a fundamental unraveling of daily life as we know it.
Section 1. The impossible headline.
You see, the initial chaos of a modern conflict wouldn't necessarily look like tanks rolling across a border or planes darkening the sky. Today, war begins in the information space. In Hour 1, you'd see an absolute tsunami of rumors, deepfakes, and desperate denials flooding the internet. People would be frantically trying to understand what they're even looking at. Is it a massive cyber attack? A limited border clash? Maybe a rogue military unit acting on its own? By Hour 4, governments across Europe are locked in secure emergency bunkers. You've got official briefings scrambling to pull NATO and the European Union into these impossible, totally unprecedented conversations. And by Hour 12, well, financial algorithms have completely panicked. Markets would swing wildly, wiping out billions in value in a matter of minutes, long before most everyday citizens have even fully processed what the news actually means. That first day wouldn't even feel like a war. It would honestly feel like we had all slipped into some dangerous, chaotic, alternate timeline.
And here's the thing you have to remember. Britain and France are not just random nations on a map. They are the central, load-bearing pillars of European history. Entire generations have lived with this core belief that the era of old-style European war between major Western democracies is completely over. Safely buried by modern institutions, interwoven economies, and common interests. A sudden invasion would shatter that deeply held belief in a single morning. It would feel like the violent past had literally reached through time and grabbed the present by the throat. The psychological whiplash alone would be paralyzing. It would force millions to realize that the rules they thought governed the world were actually incredibly fragile.
Section 2. The front door reality. Let's bring this down to the ground level. In London, millions of people would wake up to blaring emergency alerts on their phones, surrounded by confusing, contradictory reports, and this heavy, growing fear that a localized crisis might suddenly escalate directly into their own neighborhoods. Over in Paris, the reality is equally terrifying but physically different. Families would be literally checking doors and windows, gripped by an anxiety no ordinary morning should ever hold. You would have mothers trying to calmly explain the unexplainable to their kids while the TV just loops the unbearable news. University students having to decide, do I stay in my dorm or run for the countryside? And tourists, people trapped in a dream vacation spot that is instantly turned into a geopolitical flashpoint, desperately flooding embassies and train stations.
The really crucial realization here is that modern war enters not with a grand political announcement, but straight through the front door. It walks directly into kitchens, classrooms, and local clinics. Think of your neighborhood shopkeeper watching regular customers rush in to panic buy bottled water, batteries, canned goods, just desperately grabbing at anything that feels like control in a totally uncontrollable situation. Think of hospital staff in both countries instantly shifting from routine care to mass casualty protocols, frantically clearing beds and stockpiling blood. The human side of conflict is never, ever as clean or organized as the tactical maps suggest. It is deeply messy, exhausting, frightening, and intensely personal.
Moving on to Section 3, the economic earthquake. Now, the moment conflict erupts between two major European economies, the entire continent basically stumbles. Investor confidence instantly falls off a cliff. Think about the English Channel for a second. It's one of the busiest shipping lanes in the entire world, processing billions in trade. Ferries, the Eurotunnel, freight companies, all of it halts immediately.
Airlines ground their flights, agricultural exports literally rot on the docks, and global energy markets spike out of sheer panic. Banking systems and massive insurance firms would experience a simultaneous devastating heart attack as their risk models break down entirely. The broader European economy wouldn't just slow down, it would hit a brick wall at full speed, freezing international commerce literally overnight.
But this isn't just about Wall Street executives or big multinational banks. In our deeply interconnected world, millions of people who are thousands of miles away from the front lines would feel the massive financial damage by lunchtime. We're talking about the immediate cost of rent, fuel to heat your home, and everyday groceries skyrocketing as vital supply chains just snap. Jobs will be lost within days as businesses panic, freeze all their spending, and cancel expansions. Life savings tied up in pensions and investments would take a massive, immediate hit. So everyone pays a harsh price for this crisis, especially everyday people who had absolutely no say in it.
Which brings us to Section 4, Geopolitical Shockwaves.
Because remember, France and Britain aren't isolated islands. They are key players in global security. If one attacks the other, the entire international system threatens to cave in. The European Union would instantly scramble into emergency crisis talks, and they'd potentially be paralyzed by member states terrified of taking sides. NATO? NATO would face the ultimate existential test of its unity and purpose. I mean, this is an unprecedented attack coming from inside the house. The United States would be on the phone within minutes, frantically demanding immediate de-escalation from both capitals. And you better believe other world powers would be watching like hawks, calculating their own advantages. So this wouldn't remain a bilateral issue for long. It would be the ultimate stress test for the entire Western world.
And then, of course, there is the terrifying military reality. Even a limited war between two modern, heavily armed nations brings severe risks. We're talking catastrophic cyber attacks targeting power grids and a blindingly fast cycle of retaliation. The dilemma here is deeply complex. The question isn't just who strikes first. The much harder question is, who chooses restraint second? When emotions are running that high, who is actually willing to back down? And finally, who has the political courage to stop the spiral before it triggers total devastation? Political legitimacy becomes a fierce battlefield of its own. Every speech is measured, every mistake is magnified, and leaders are operating under extreme pressure, knowing full well that if public support collapses, the whole shebang falls apart.
Section 5. The Fragility of Peace.
The entire continent would be forced into this impossible corner, caught squarely between shock, a desperate need for unity, and overwhelming fear. Borders that have been totally open and freely crossed for decades could suddenly lock down tight. Drastic emergency laws would activate overnight, heavily restricting civilian airspace and mobilizing domestic militaries. We would immediately see mass refugee movements as terrified civilians flee potential conflict zones. The idea of lasting peace in Europe is arguably one of modern history's greatest achievements, and this conflict would tear at its very core. Trust would evaporate instantly, the trauma would linger for generations, and citizens everywhere would just have to wonder, can peace ever truly be taken for granted again?
What this scenario really forces us to realize is that peace is not just a background setting. It's not some automatic, permanent feature of the modern world that just sustains itself. Actually, it's a highly fragile structure that has to be actively maintained, constantly negotiated, and fiercely protected every single day. If two of the oldest partners in the world can suddenly become adversaries, if that bond can break, then absolutely no security assumption is permanent. It's a pretty sobering realization about the tightrope we walk every day without even looking down.
So, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. How quickly can civilization forget why it learned not to repeat history? History never truly disappears, right? It just waits patiently for us to forget exactly what it cost the last time. If this explainer made you realize just how fragile our reality really is, please share it, and make sure to subscribe for more deep dives that break down complex realities like this. Because sometimes exploring the absolute unthinkable is the only way to genuinely appreciate and protect the world we have today. Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.